The short-term missions movement is one of the biggest trends in global ministry over the last 3 decades. We know that these short-term trips can be amazing formative experiences, but if we're not careful, it's easy for our lives to quickly revert back to our previous normal routines. Are we really effectively integrating what we've learned from these trips? Are we really seeing a good return on investment, if I can say it that way? Today we're going to talk about effective follow-up for short-term missions.
Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a podcast for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes. Here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to his friends as Mags.
Hi again, everyone. Today we're going to be talking again about short-term missions and how we can help participants effectively process their trip and integrate what they've learned into their lives back home. Our guest is Don Johnson, who's back again on the podcast, and he has some very practical advice on following up short-term mission trips. Just before we get to that interview, we'd like to share with you this missions resource.
Do you have the Joshua Project app? Download this free app from the Google Play or Apple Store and start using it today. The Joshua Project app provides you with a daily summary of an unreached people group and how you can be praying for the work happening among them. Download the Joshua Project app and join the team in praying that God's kingdom would come to every tribe, every tongue, and every nation. And now, here's our interview with today's expert guest.
Well, hi again, everyone. I am pleased to welcome you to today's interview with our special guest, Don Johnson. And for those of you that haven't met Don, he and his wife, Sherilyn, have served with Send International since 1987, first in Alaska and then Russia, and he spent 10 years leading the short-term missions department in the United States. Don also serves with an organization entitled Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Missions. Don, we want to say welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Max. Good to be with you again.
And this is one of the occasions where we have explored a topic with one of our guests and decided to come back to it. Don, previously we had you on to summarize what is called the 7 Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Missions. And if you're listening to this episode and you'd like to go back and find that episode, it's on our website at globalmissionspodcast.com. Don, we're glad to have you back, and today we really want to unpack one of those 7 standards, the last of 7, actually, thorough follow-through. So, to start off, would you give us a quick explanation of what is meant by thorough follow-through and why is it so important?
Sure. Thorough follow-through includes the whole concept of debriefing. And debriefing actually involves all participants, but specifically focuses on those that go. But it's a chance to process what the short-termer has experienced as a part of their short-term mission trip in order to understand that experience and explore what they ought to do and be in response to it. But the follow-through actually goes beyond the debrief process itself and works towards helping the short-termers cement any life change, or cultivate any ongoing growth and commitment to Christ and his work that might have come out of their short-term missions experience. It helps the short-termer identify what might be their next steps in ministry, or perhaps some things that they need to deal with in their life, and then helps them take the step to follow through on accomplishing those things, rather than just pointing in the right direction, actually kind of hands them off to make sure that takes place.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing you saying is that what we think of as a meeting, a debrief meeting, after a short-term experience, that is part of the follow-through. It's like a phase, really. It's more than just a meeting. It's a period of time.
Yeah, and it takes place over a period of time, the debrief and follow-through. Debrief is, in a sense, kind of the tool that you use to determine what the follow-through should be, what the next steps would be for the short-termer.
Well, take us a bit toward some of the benefits then. What are some of the things that you have seen to be beneficial by doing a great job of follow through?
Well, research on short-term missions continually points to the debrief process, the culmination of the trip, as the most critical part of short-term missions, but also the most neglected part of short-term missions. Researchers have come out pretty strongly on this topic and said things like, if you take a group on a short-term experience and don't give proper attention to debrief and follow through, you're being irresponsible. One researcher went so far as to say you're being unethical. There could be lost growth or return on the money invested. That's how critical researchers say that the whole debrief follow-through process is. However, in every survey that the Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Missions has done, we've asked churches and agencies to kind of do a self-evaluation as they look at the whole 7 standards and identify which standard they feel like they're the weakest in. And invariably, it's standard number 7, the thorough follow-through, the debrief. This something they just don't feel like they really have a handle on or do well. And this whole debrief and follow-through, it's not just a short-term missions thing. The reality is anyone who spends time cross-culturally could need to be debriefed and kind of mentored along through a follow-through process in order to re-enter life in North America well. There was a business study that was published a few years ago where some multinational corporations were taking their best and brightest young new managers and sending them to overseas assignments with the goal that they'd spend some time in these overseas locations, learn some new stuff, bring that back to the corporate headquarters, and enhance the whole organization. What was happening, within the first year of their return, 30% of these managers were quitting. Within 3 years, another 40% had quit. So they brought in some consultants to study what was going on, and bottom line, they said these managers and their families actually need some time of debrief and some mentoring to reintegrate. While they've been overseas, whether you go for a 2-week trip or you're there for a couple of years, you should experience something that's going to change you. You're going to see some new things. You're going to get a new view of the world, maybe a new view of yourself. On a short-term missions trip, you may get a new view of God. All of that, when you come back in and try to reintegrate back into your church, your family, your friends, you may find yourself out of sync with who you were and what you've left behind. And it takes a process to help people work that through so they can get back in integration with life back home. One leader in short-term missions was speaking at a conference, and during the question and answer session, someone challenged him to say, if you had to choose between the pre-field training or a post-field debrief, which would you choose? Well, of course, he said, well, you can't choose. You got to do both.
Right.
He said, no, if you had to choose just one, which would you choose? And he thought for a second. He said, well, I'd go with the debrief. And they said, well, why is that? He said, because either if you don't do debrief, either you're going to leave someone possibly worse off than if they'd never gone on the short-term missions trip at all, because there may be some issues that have been unprocessed, some things that are unresolved. Or if they have grown, if they've seen God work in their lives, they may have some renewed passion. And if they don't have someone help them know how to process that and take the next steps, you could lose all that growth that took place.
Right.
One of the most common complaints I hear from pastors and missions pastors is, we took this team or this group on a short-term missions trip and they came back all excited and passionate, and 6 months or a year later, it's all kind of gone.
Right.
So we need to help retain that growth and that passion. Debrief and follow through helps do that.
You've set the stage very helpfully to show how important it is. And unfortunately, we haven't always done a good job of it. I mean, we as churches and as agencies perhaps too. And just what can slip away. I think many of us have met, or even experienced it ourselves, but met workers who have been overseas short-term. They've been impacted by it, but it's not really consolidated into their lives and thinking as they go forward. And so it just slips away and becomes an experience sometime in my past.
Yeah, there was a young Bible college student who went to Peru for a short-term missions trip, came back, did not get any kind of debrief, and several months later was just feeling this kind of sadness, this nostalgia, didn't know where that came from or why that was there. Nobody helped her think that through a process, and she just kind of just hung on to this kind of sense of sadness at leaving her friends and whatever behind. Others have gone and come across some strong issues theologically, like going to Japan and then wrestling through what happens to all these nice Japanese people who have never heard about Jesus when they die, or going to the slums of Haiti and saying, how can a loving God allow people to live in such poverty? All that can lead to some questioning, some issues, and often can actually result in people drifting away from the church because they have these questions, these issues, and maybe some sadness or emotions that they don't know how to process, and they don't know what to do with it, so they walk away. Or they come back with a new sense of some gifting. Maybe they identified some gifts they didn't know they had, or they got a renewed passion for the lost, and they come back home, and they don't know what to do with that. Where do I take this?
Even the positive fruit then isn't cultivated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need some guidance into what are the next steps now to take in light of what you've seen or what God has done in your life. How do you move forward with that? What's God's next step for you?
Very good. You've made the case. It's an important thing that we need to do a better job of. Let's turn to the practical questions of how we can do a better job of that. When should this debriefing, when should this follow through take place?
Well, first off, debriefing should be an ongoing process. The first subpoint on standard number 7 says, we need to have comprehensive debriefing pre-field, on-field, and post-field. And pre-field, that means like during the training sessions, you've talked to people about raising support. Well, how do they feel about that? You've talked to people about ministering cross-culturally. What are their concerns or fears, or are they excited about that? Just kind of give people a chance to process that. On-field, a very simple tool that people can use to help debrief their short-termers on-field is something called a one-word exercise. So each day, you ask everybody, how do you feel about this event that took place when nobody showed up for our VBS? Or what was your response when you got this opportunity to share your faith at the coffee house? Give people the chance to express that because they have feelings, they have things that they need to deal with. So it's an ongoing process. But the really big push for the debrief, of course, comes at the end as you begin to reintegrate back into the North American life. So that whole, as you mentioned earlier, that debriefing is a process, and look at it in like 4 stages. The first stage is kind of the final on-field debrief, and on-field is kind of in quotes because it's best if it's after the short-termers have actually left their ministry place, the ministry location, but they're not yet back home. Maybe it's a stop-off on the way back. You got to lay over at the airport or something like that to process. Kind of, you don't have one foot in either location yet. You're kind of in between to kind of begin to look back and look forward. Stage 2 would be kind of a celebration where you get together with friends, family, church, supporters, and just celebrate what God has done and also report back to your senders. That whole reporting back, sharing your stories, that's actually part of the debrief. As people need to hear what you've done, what's happened on the short-term mission trip, but also just the opportunity for the short-termer to share that is beneficial and helps accomplish debriefing. Stage 3 would be a team debrief, kind of a more serious meeting of the team. You want to have that about a month after the team gets back, kind of past that initial honeymoon stage of everybody's happy to be back home. But you begin to raise some serious questions about what has God shown us, what's the next steps, and you give team members an opportunity to kind of share together and help one another. And then stage 4 is an individual interview and what I like to call the handoff. That's where the team leader takes everything that's been identified in the previous debrief steps and helps identify then the next steps for that individual or couple and launches them into taking those steps.
So the handoff then is responsibility from the team back to the individual then?
No, the handoff is where the team leader identifies to whom he or she should pass this particular team member off to. In other words, the debriefer or team leader, if the team leader is doing the debrief, can't take responsibility to disciple this person, all their team members, for the rest of their lives, but they can take responsibility to find out who would be the right person to do that, to take them on that next step and help them make that transition.
Right. So that leads us to another topic, making sure that we have our short-term team leaders well prepared as well.
Absolutely.
Special investment into these folks who are leading the short-term teams leads to more effective follow-through and effective debriefing and cultivation of the fruit.
And in fact, that's where I focus most of my training in terms of short-term missions, is training team leaders in how to lead their short-term teams well.
Right. So, Don, you've described 4 stages here. The first is on field, but after having left the ministry location. Second is celebration with the sending body and reporting out what's happened back at the sending church. Third is a team brief, maybe a month after the short-term mission has been completed. And then finally, an individual interview sometime after that month as well, where the team leader helps identify and then pass on an individual into next steps.
That's right. It's not just a one-shot deal that you do on a Saturday afternoon. This is a process to help people move forward in their walk with the Lord.
You know, it really does show that there's a major investment after the trip. And I think this is something that would be helpful to missions committees and churches as well to understand, yes, there's a lot of investment pre-field, getting ready to go. There's fundraising, there's cross-cultural awareness and all of that stuff. But the investment doesn't end when the team returns home. If we want to do a really good job of this, it's a longer-term investment.
Yeah, and I validate the fact that in reality, most of us, by the time we get home from a short-term missions trip, we're so tired. We spent so much time and investment already. It's like, okay, I'm done. I quit. And I did that with the very first team that I took, and really did them and the sending church a disservice by not doing the debrief and thorough follow-through that needed to take place.
Well, let's turn that to the other side then and said you've obviously learned from that. Can you give us an example of a debriefing that went really well and some of the outcomes that this can lead to?
Yeah, there was a college team that went overseas, and they were coming back to North America and wanted some help with their debrief. So they came by the send offices in Michigan and asked if I would help them with the debrief. And it was summertime, and these were students, and so the team leader knew that as soon as they landed back home, they're all going to scatter back, to their various houses. But we sat down, and one of the things I like to do in the on-field aspect of the debrief is ask people to not only kind of prepare themselves for returning, but in a sense help encourage each other in terms of preparation for returning. And I'll ask them to, as part of the whole debrief, to take 3 people, usually the person on the left, person on the right, and one other person in the group, and say something like, I saw Jesus shine through you when, or I saw the gift of blank in you when. And it's a chance, in a sense, for each team member to kind of see themselves through the eyes of their team that they've been working with now for 10 days, 2 weeks, however long it was. And so we got to that phase of the debrief with this particular team, and Doug, I'll use the name Doug, was on the team, and he was one of the ones that the first person identified. And they said, well, Doug, I saw the gift of pastoring in you when. They gave an incident. And the next person also had Doug on their list and said, well, Doug, I saw the gift of pastoring in you when. And that was kind of funny. The third person had Doug as one of the ones they picked on their list. And they also said, Doug, I saw the gift of pastoring in you when. And then it wasn't so funny anymore. They went all the way around the circle, and each person had written down Doug on their list and said, Doug, I saw the gift of pastoring in you. And they each had a different incident. By the time that was finished, everybody, including Doug, was just in tears. Doug saw himself in a whole new light. He never perceived that gift in him. And that changed his whole course for his life and ministry. He moved on to go to seminary and was preparing for the pastorate, all because his teammates saw something in him that he had kind of closed his own eyes to, that brought it to light. He embraced that and moved forward with it. So in a sense, the church in general gained because of the debrief that took place. And the team leader told me afterwards, she said, if we just skipped this whole debrief thing and just gone back to the campus, all these students would have gone to their homes. Maybe we would have had some kind of meeting back in the fall, maybe not. But maybe Doug would not have heard what he needed to hear about what God had done in his life.
Wow, it's a great story. It's pretty evident that you have some favorite questions, Don, that you like to include in these debrief discussions. What are some of the questions that you like to ask?
Well, during the stage one, kind of you're not on the field anymore, but you're not home yet, it's a chance to kind of look back and also look forward. Looking back, you might encourage your short-termers to kind of finish some open-ended statements or open-ended questions, like, when I think of leaving, I feel, or the things I'm going to miss about where we were or who we were with is, or the things I'll be happy to leave behind are, and there's always some things we're kind of glad to leave behind often. And then the looking back, for your teammates, encouraging one another when I saw the gift of blank in you. And then looking forward, thinking, what's my reception going to be like from my church, or my family, my friends? When I think of returning home, I feel there's some open-ended statements and questions to get people to start to processing, because they've got these feelings and thoughts inside them. Sometimes just being able to write them out or verbalize them helps make them real and helps them deal and process them a whole lot better. Then during the team debrief of stage 3, that's where you get really serious and you ask people, okay, what are you doing with what you learned about God or about yourself or about missions? What did you learn? What new insights or challenges do you see? And how are you processing that? Or what often happens, people come back and they struggle with some things. Maybe they've had some disappointments regarding their expectations because people didn't want to hear their stories about their trip, or nobody understands how they're feeling now that they've come back from the short-term mission trip. It gives people a chance to express that, and for the team leader or the debriefer to hear that and begin to think through, okay, what needs to happen in this person's life to help them move forward after the short-term missions trip.
Mm-hmm. Well, at this point, I'll mention a great list of questions. We will compile these questions in the show notes that we'll have on the website. So don't be concerned if you heard these questions and you're trying to remember them. We'll capture them all in the show notes, as well as the organization that actually Don and I both serve with, Send International, has a template for asking these questions during a debrief, and we appreciate every situation is unique. You can adapt this for your own purposes, but we offer that to you as a starting point that will probe your thinking and encourage you to ask some very healthy questions during the follow-through phase. You can find that in the show notes as well. Along that line, Don, I wonder if you would just mention any recommended resources that you have for those churches and missions committees and maybe colleges who really do want to do a great job of following through.
Yeah, there's a few books out there. This is not a topic that's written on perhaps as thoroughly as could be, but one good resource is actually it's a series or a set of materials called The Next Mile. And it comes in 2 different sets. One is designed for all ages, adults, young adults. There's also a specific youth edition. If your youth group is going on a short-term missions trip, this will help the leader or debriefer be able to help those students or whoever process. Another one is called Reentry Guide for Short-Term Mission Leaders. That's by Lisa Spinelli Chin. And a third one is more generic. It's actually designed for career people coming home, but a lot of the principles apply to short-termers as well. It's called Reentry, Making the Transition from Missions to Life at Home, published by YWAM.
Excellent. And again, we will include all of those resources in the show notes. You can find them there. Don, I want to ask, if someone is listening to this podcast and they're on a missions committee or they're involved in short-term missions somehow, they'd like to learn more, they might like to talk with you or follow up with you, how can they learn more from you?
I'd be glad to get an email. My email address is djohnson, my first initial, last name, djohnson@send.org, and just say that they were listening to this podcast and wanted to ask for more direction or assistance. Be glad to do that.
Super. Thank you for being willing to do that. I appreciate we've just scratched the surface on a very needy topic. Early on, Don said this is identified as one of the most important standards for short-term missions being done well, but it's one of the most neglected elements as well. So I think together, Don, you've helped us think about this. You've got the thinking going at least, and we appreciate very much you helping us anticipate doing a better job of this in the future. Thanks so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me, Mags. Glad to be with you.
We hope you found today's interview to be both informative and inspiring. If you missed anything or would like to check out the resources or links mentioned during the interview, you can find the show notes we've prepared at our website, globalmissionspodcast.com. You can also use the website or our Facebook page to suggest a particular topic or expert you'd like to hear featured on this program. The Global Missions Podcast is co-sponsored by the Jaffrey Centre for Global Initiatives and Send International of Canada. Thanks for listening in. I'm your host, Mags, and I invite you to join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.